At least once in your life, be it at school, with friends, or even family, you've probably taken part in burying a time capsule. You know, those buried collection of trinkets and letters meant to be dug up at some point in the future. And though these nifty things are no doubt fun to bury, the stark and kind of sad reality behind them is that these time capsules have a notoriously poor survival rate. In fact, after just 5 years, over 95% of them are lost track of, never to be seen or talked about again. Yet sometimes they really do make it, and the oldest retrieved man-made time capsule is a 231-year-old metal container that was buried by Samuel Adams, a founding father, and Paul Revere in 1795. So, pretty impressive. But even then, this time capsule has nothing on Mother Nature, which has been known to create time capsules of sort on occasion, including one that has been virtually buried and isolated from the rest of the planet for not 500 years, 1,000, or even 10,000 years, but 5.5 million years. Until in the 20th century, just 40 years ago, humans accidentally popped it open, revealing within it a lost ecosystem whose interior and inhabitants had zero contact with the outside, making the most untouched and detached environment on our planet. And this is the Movila Cave. You'd probably never guess it, but this literally one-of-a-kind place was found a few kilometers off the coast of the Black Sea, in a quiet Romanian city named Mongolia. A city which, by the way, has roots going back over 2,500 years, making it one of the oldest, most continuously lived-in cities on the planet. And yet, for nearly that whole time, everyone in it was unaware of the wonders lurking just beneath their feet. But this would all change in 1986, as in a routine project for a geographical survey, a group of construction workers accidentally punched a hole straight through a subterranean void while building an artificial shaft. The first contact occurred at approximately 21 meters or 70 feet below the surface, and little did the workers know just how important of a discovery they were making. Now, for all intents and purposes, the hole created, at first, just looked like any other giant pit, with seemingly endless darkness and nothingness. And yet, it was anything but that, as in reality they had stumbled upon a large network of underground paths, composed of limestone and clay that stretched out for over 200 meters or 660 feet, so over twice the wingspan of an Airbus A380. In some areas, the cave was partially or fully submerged in water, while then other paths appeared dry, and in total they identified 3 main chambers that would be dubbed Airbell 1, Airbell 2, and Lake Room, respectively. Unsurprisingly, the discovery of a subterranean large cave immediately drew the attention of a good chunk of the scientific community. But that interest just about exploded when a team performed radiometric dating on the cave and found that the limestone which constructed the cave and had sealed it was old, seriously old, dating back 5.5 million years ago, a time when the late Miocene was still raging on. And to put this into perspective, this meant that the cave, and all that was inside, hadn't seen the surface or light of day since megalodons prowled the oceans, giant megabirds like the Argentavis ruled the sky, and both mammoths and humans weren't yet but a twinkle in evolution's eye. And I think it probably goes without saying that discovering something so untouched like this doesn't happen very often. In fact, it's never happened, so one could see why the scientific community were all over this place. And very quickly they understood that nothing in this cave was typical, even the atmosphere, which was, let's just say, hazardous to humans. And perhaps that's an understatement, as besides the perpetual darkness, the air is noxious, at least to us, being a vastly different composition than the outside, with oxygen levels being just 1/3, while then also possessing over 100 times more carbon dioxide, plus dangerously high concentrations of both hydrogen sulfide and ammonia. Meaning that if you breathe this stuff in, you simultaneously suffocate, go into respiratory failure, and get poisoned. So a 3-for-1 deal. And guess what? It wasn't just the air. The water in here didn't fare much better either, as it had been stagnant for millions of years and was extremely devoid of dissolved oxygen, rendering it highly anoxic, with the anoxic levels significantly increasing as you reach the bottom of the waters, which are about 1.5 meters or 5 feet deep at their deepest. So really, everything at first glance in this cave just seems highly adverse to life. And for a cherry on top, you would also have to deal with the uncomfortable humidity levels in there that hover around 100% perpetually. Which, I don't know about you, sounds to me like a living hell, except steam room version. And when you combine all these traits and factors, you get a place that is both horrific and lethal to be trapped in for a day, let alone for 5 mega-annums, which is code for millions. However, as Dr. Ian Malcolm says, life finds a way. And this extends to the Movila Cave, which doesn't just have a few extremophiles, but rather possesses a whole entire ecosystem unlike anything others seen on Earth, figuratively and literally. As since its discovery, researchers have identified hundreds of species, which the large majority of are solely found in this one cave, a cave which is no bigger than the Capitol building. And what's truly remarkable about the residents of this time capsule is that unlike the vast majority of ecosystems on Earth, they don't rely on photosynthesis, seeing that they can't, as no light reaches here, with the biome instead running off of chemosynthesis, meaning instead of the sun being their energy source, the organisms have to make their own, usually stemming from certain bacteria that oxidize the hydrogen sulfide, methane, and ammonia, converting inorganic carbon into organic matter, which then shows up as microbial mats. And those then serve as the base energy source for the entire cave, that everything either directly or indirectly relies on. And miraculously, it's produced in enough quantities that you don't just have bacteria here, but many walks of life, both aquatic and terrestrial, including animals. Admittedly though, don't expect to find any monstrous cave dwellers lurking here, as all the animals and life in Movila tend to be on the smaller side. Yet, in my opinion, they are still surprisingly large and diverse. As again, despite being virtually isolated for 5 million years, you will still find a multitude of isopods, spiders, pseudoscorpions, acarian, chilopods, millipedes, springtails, dipleuran, and centipedes on the land alone. Some of these guys rely on eating the microbial mats, others decaying organic films, and then you even have predators, including the cave's largest predator, the centipede, Cryptops speleorex, a species only found in this place, and is about the length of a credit card's short side. So again, not giant by any means, but in here, it's still the king. And a king that honestly I probably would not want to mess with, as even to a human, a sting from this critter might hurt a lot. As just like all centipedes, it has retained its venom that it injects via pincer-like appendages, serving to immobilize and kill its prey. In Movila though, it's not enough to just be deadly. You have to be a deadly ninja, which all the predators virtually are, considering they're forced to live and hunt in an environment without light. And thus, instead of eyesight, many of them have evolved to be blind or outright eyeless, such as the water scorpion, Nepa anophthalma. A striking example is generally water scorpions hunt relying on eyesight. But instead, these guys and the other predators rely on a mix of specialized touch, chemical sensing, or vibrations to identify, stalk, and ambush their targets. On top of failing any DMV eyesight test, the animals in Movila tend to be of different coloration too, usually being either albino-like or straight up see-through, as seen in the spiders and multiple isopods, which just goes to make this place feel more like that insect scene from King Kong, albeit thankfully on a much smaller scale. And the reason why so many have changed their appearance is that, with no light, having pigmentation suddenly offers no survival value. Surprise, surprise. And in a place where every ounce of energy counts, you definitely don't want to waste it on what's not needed. And then to survive the toxic air, species here have also evolved unique respiratory systems to deal with the low oxygen and elevated levels of CO2 and hydrogen sulfide. Now interestingly, of all the sections identified within the cave, it seems that the majority of terrestrial species all reside in a single room, dubbed the lake room. And though terrestrial life is more diverse here than the aquatic, it doesn't mean the waters are empty, as despite their own anoxic conditions, you will also find different walks of life, or swims of life. And so far, researchers have identified 6 primary ones that make up this water world ecosystem. The first of which being the myofauna, not to be confused with megafauna, as these are small benthic invertebrates that we typically cannot even see with our bare eyes. And they include rotifers, polychaetes, and nematodes, i.e. the group that produces parasitic worms. So you ain't gonna catch me taking a sip from this water, freshwater, poisoned or not. Then you have both crustaceans like ostracods or copepods, as well as a few water scorpions, as I mentioned, which are among the water's larger creatures and are the only known cave-adapted water scorpions on the entire planet. Moving towards more worm shapes, you'll also spot a variety of earthworms here in the group flatworms, which, despite their similar names, are not that close related. And then finally, the water is also home to multiple leeches, so back again towards the parasitic side. But there is a caveat to that. Because, as you may be wondering, how does a leech survive in here with no animals to suck blood from? And the truth of the matter is that only 70% of leeches are parasitic, and the ones found in Movila aren't, instead of them being active predators, scavengers, or both, who either swallow animals whole like a snake, munch on biofilm, or use a specially adapted spear like proboscis to skewer victims and slurp their insides. So, arguably even worse than a parasite. And just like the terrestrial animals, those in the water are virtually all blind and rely on other senses and unique organs to locate their food. And what's really crazy about all of this is that, given the sheer isolation of this cave, the inhabitants and their descendants have been locked in a battle of predation and survival with one another for millions of years, with absolutely no respite. In other words, imagine being some little cave critter that's been preyed upon by the exact same family for millions upon millions of years. Yeah, that might be the definition of a bad neighbor if I've ever heard it. Now with this said, while all the animals in the ecosystem seem to have been trapped for a very long time, they did not all arrive on the same day. And one of the most recent additions to the cave is a snail species dubbed the Heliobia dabragica, which has been in the cave for just a little bit over 2 million years, implying that although this place is sealed pretty tight, it's not 100% locked out from the outside world. Well, at least 2 million years back it wasn't. But how this snail ended up here millions of years after the underground cave formed is unknown, with one hypothesis being that snail eggs, which can be the size of a grain of sand, traveled into the cave through the groundwater system at some point. However, once you're there, you're pretty much stuck, and as a result of the mind-boggling isolation, virtually every creature discovered here is genetically distinct from their nearest surface relatives, and then also demonstrate extremely low genetic diversity. And as such, scientists have to be very careful with this ecosystem, as it is highly sensitive, and this includes simply the fact of letting researchers in. And as such, entry to the cave is limited to a few times per year, and only involves a handful of selected scientists. Yet, while it may be fragile, it is still impressively extensive, with animals not being the only thing that lurks here. As mentioned, one of the most important communities in this void, if not the most important, are the bacteria which produce those mats of biofilm that go to sustain the rest. And what's really fascinating about these biofilms is that they differ from one chamber to the next, with one room having a thin white film, while another one had a thick yellow one, reflecting that each consists of very different bacterial communities that in themselves are isolated from one another to a degree. And we see the same thing in the cave's prokaryotes as well, plus non-animal eukaryotes, including large amounts of fungi and protists, who themselves are often found in dense concentrations within these microbial mats. On top of that, other microscopic eukaryotes include a range of stromenophiles, alveolata, and excavata, who just like the animals, tend to be species unique to this cave, and show very special adaptations to survive in this bizarre micro-world. But with all this said, you may be thinking, well, that's pretty cool and all, but what's so important about it? And the answer to that is, besides being incredibly cool, the Movila Cave is actually not some just weird odd gimmick that is meant to entertain people through a screen. It in fact also holds real importance to the bigger picture of life, especially namely extraterrestrial, as researchers have used it to make hypotheses and observations about potential subterranean ecosystems on otherworldly moons, such as Jupiter's Europa and Saturn's Enceladus. As such, while it is quite a stretch, this cave could be an insight into how life operates in such extreme extraterrestrial places. And its importance doesn't stop there, with another big field being the study of symbiotic relationships. As in Movila, there are some pretty novel forms of it seen pretty much nowhere else, with the primary example being the presence of the amphipods Niphargus, who no joke, go around wearing bacteria on their exoskeleton, which would be the equivalent of humans deciding one day to pair up with bacteria and have them be our clothes, exclusively. Now, we don't exactly know why these guys wear the bacteria, but a few interesting ideas have been presented. One being that it's for peak fashion sense, jokes, and another, real one, being that this bacteria produces a film on the skin of the amphipods, which they can then eat, which honestly might be even more crazy than the fashion part, the fact that they wear clothes simply so they can eat them. Another idea is that these bacteria either help to dispel the otherwise harmful effects of hydrogen sulfide, which as I said is in high concentrations in the cave system, or that they simply help protect from other harmful microbes. But whatever the case, it is a fascinating example of just how far animals will adapt to conform to an ecosystem, no matter how harsh or destitute it may seem. And I also think this is very important to remember, which is this was an ecosystem discovered by pure chance and luck. So in other words, just imagine how many other hidden ecosystems there are really just waiting to be discovered. Makes you wonder, right? Thanks for watching, and until next time.